Well, exactly one Republican senator voted against Brett Kavanaugh's nomination to the Supreme Court today. Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski said that she decided how to vote when she was on her way to the Senate chamber to cast her vote. Now, Senator Murkowski had women fly down from Alaska to try to influence her vote, and it seems as though they succeeded. We will be talking to two of those women later in this hour. Senate rules allow the video camera shots of individual senators only when those senators are on their feet speaking. And so there is no video of Senator Murkowski as she entered the Senate chamber, having just made her decision on the way, as she was sitting there waiting on the Senate floor, and as that vote was approaching. We have no video of Senator Murkowski after she voted. Stephen Dennis of Bloomberg was able to keep an eye on Senator Murkowski from the press gallery above the Senate floor in the Senate chamber, looking down on Senator Murkowski when she was on the floor. And here is what he described in a tweet at 11:18 a.m. Watched Murkowski entire time. Her demeanor changed a bit after Collins and Flake voted aye. Her vote no longer the deciding vote. She looked down for a while, closed her eyes, blinked a bunch, then looked up with resolve. When her name was called, she stood and said, no, softly. Senator Murkowski did not fully explain her vote until tonight on the Senate floor. Senator Murkowski's explanation was an echo of what we heard yesterday from former Supreme Court Justice John Paul Stevens, who said he changed his mind personally about the suitability of Brett Kavanaugh for the Supreme Court because of the way Brett Kavanaugh behaved in last week's Judiciary Committee hearing, in which Brett Kavanaugh claimed through tears and rage that he was facing an attempted rape allegation by Dr. Christine Blasey Ford because of a Democratic Party conspiracy that included what Brett Kavanaugh called revenge on behalf of the Clintons. Justice Stevens was horrified by what Brett Kavanaugh had to say, not in Brett Kavanaugh's denial of the accusations against him, but in the accusations that Brett Kavanaugh made about so many people who were out to get him. And Justice Stevens said that meant that Brett Kavanaugh could not be trusted to be an impartial Supreme Court justice on cases that might involve the large range of people and organizations that Brett Kavanaugh attacked in his own confirmation hearing. Senator Murkowski did not mention John Paul Stevens and what she had to say tonight, but surely every member of the Senate knows exactly what Justice Stevens said yesterday, because it is the first time a retired Supreme Court justice has ever publicly opposed the nomination of a new Supreme Court justice. Here is some of what Senator Murkowski had to say.
I have a very high bar for any nominee to the Supreme Court of the United States. The Code of Judicial Conduct Rule 1.2, this is one that many people in this body know, but it states that, quote, a judge act at all times in a manner that promotes public confidence in the independence, integrity, and impartiality of the judiciary, and shall avoid impropriety and the appearance of impropriety. And after the hearing that we all watched last Thursday, it became clear to me, or was becoming clearer, that appearance of impropriety has become unavoidable. And I've been deliberating, agonizing about what is fair. Is this too unfair a burden to place on somebody that is dealing with the worst, the most horrific allegations that go to your integrity, that go to everything that you are? And I think we all struggle with how we would respond. But I am reminded there are only 9 seats on the bench of the highest court in the land. And these seats are occupied by these men and women for their lifetime. And so those who seek one of these seats must meet the highest standard in all respects at all times, and that is hard.
When Republican Senator Susan Collins announced her decision to vote for Brett Kavanaugh today, she became, in effect, the deciding vote in favor of Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation. Susan Collins spent 45 minutes to get to the point of announcing that she would vote for Brett Kavanaugh, but it was obvious from the start when she began praising Brett Kavanaugh's judicial record, and most importantly, when she announced the standard that she used for evaluating Dr. Ford's accusation against Brett Kavanaugh.
In evaluating any given claim of misconduct, we will be ill-served in the long run if we abandon the presumption of innocence.
Senator Collins claimed that we should always presume that someone is innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, which we all know is true in a criminal trial, but has never been true in the United States Senate. And Susan Collins herself does not believe in that standard in the United States Senate. Susan Collins is one of the senators who said that Al Franken should resign from the Senate, even though sexual harassment accusations against him had not been investigated at all by the Senate. And Al Franken himself immediately asked for a Senate Ethics Committee investigation of the charges against him before any other senator even suggested such an investigation. He asked for a Senate Ethics Committee investigation in which, if we are to believe Susan Collins today, Susan Collins would have given him the presumption of innocence. But Susan Collins did not give him the presumption of innocence, said he should resign. Without 1 minute of investigation, Susan Collins threw that presumption away and said Senator Franken should resign. The Senate has never used the presumption of innocence standard with nominees, never, for any position. Many nominees have been forced to withdraw for much less than what Brett Kavanaugh was accused of. And so, Senator Collins' attempt to attach her vote to a sacred principle of presumption of innocence in the United States Senate was not really what she was doing today. Presumption of innocence was a convenient tool for her to cite today. But don't expect Susan Collins to use the presumption of innocence tomorrow if a Democratic senator faces accusations. Senator Collins reviewed Brett Kavanaugh's denial of Dr. Ford's accusation as if the denial was a fact because Brett Kavanaugh said it under oath.
Judge Kavanaugh forcefully denied the allegations under penalty of perjury. Mark Judge denied under penalty of felony that he had witnessed an assault.
So Dr. Ford accused two people of committing a crime, two people of attempting to rape her, Brett Kavanaugh and Mark Judge. And Susan Collins is very impressed by the two accused criminals denying the crime under oath. That's what accused criminals do every day. Susan Collins did not just give Brett Kavanaugh the presumption of innocence. She also gave him the presumption of honesty. She presumed Brett Kavanaugh was telling the truth. And possibly even worse, she presumed that Mark Judge was telling the truth. A man who has said that he was a blackout alcoholic in high school at the time of this accusation, and therefore obviously was involved in and participated in all sorts of events in his life that he does not remember. Republicans always knew that in order to confirm Brett Kavanaugh, they were going to have to keep Mark Judge invisible. They were going to have to make sure that the other person who was in the room during the attack, according to Dr. Ford, was not brought into the room where Dr. Ford and Brett Kavanaugh testified. Republicans feared that no one would be able to believe Mark Judge about anything that he claims to remember or not remember. And so the suppression of evidence, the refusal to call witnesses, was an important part of the Republican plan. so that a senator like Susan Collins, in casting the deciding vote in this nomination, could stand up in the United States Senate today and treat the accusations against Brett Kavanaugh as a closed case. But it could someday be a reopened case if Democrats win the House of Representatives and decide to investigate the FBI investigation of Brett Kavanaugh that was never a real investigation. Leading off our discussion now, Maya Wiley, former federal prosecutor and MSNBC legal analyst, Jill Wine-Banks, former assistant Watergate special prosecutor and an MSNBC legal contributor, and Lisa Graves, former chief counsel for nominations for Democrats on the Senate Judiciary Committee and the former deputy assistant attorney general in the Department of Justice. And Lisa, you know more about Senate confirmations of Supreme Court justices than any of us, and you've been with us in our coverage of this every night that we've been on it. And I just want to give you the floor tonight. I don't presume to even ask you a question or guide you in any direction. I just want to know what you're feeling, what you're thinking tonight.
Well, thank you, Lawrence, so much for having me on and have the opportunity to be part of this dialogue with you, with our country over the past couple of weeks. It's been a real roller coaster ride. There have been moments of tremendous hope and tremendous disappointment in terms of the way the process has been so railroaded by Republicans. And I think right now I have tremendous sorrow for the court and for the nation for this man being put on the court when he is so manifestly unfit for that role. He fails every high standard that's set for that court in terms of impartiality, fairness, trustworthiness, and also temperament. And temperament counts the most when you're under pressure. And I also think it's quite clear that he held his temperament when he was talking to Fox News. He wasn't screaming. He was screaming at Democratic members of that Judiciary Committee, putting on a performance, and a performance that was most unbecoming for a judge. But I have great hope that the American people have witnessed this sham that the Republicans have put together to install him on the court, and that they will hold him to account. They'll hold the politicians to account that try to sweep the testimony, eyewitness testimony of Dr. Ford under the table. And I think that there's going to be a great surge in activity by women and men across the country at this tremendous injustice. And I also think there's going to be an asterisk beside every decision that Justice Kavanaugh issues in favor of the people who helped install him on that court and against the interests of the American people.
I want to listen to President Trump when he announced what he thought the standard of proof should be in this situation, this case, if we want to call it that, in the Judiciary Committee, because we always knew, one of the first things I discussed on this program was it was going to come down to a standard of proof in evaluating the evidence presented to the committee by Dr. Ford. Let's listen to what Donald Trump said. Let's listen to how much doubt Donald Trump said was tolerable in this case.
I feel that the Republicans, and I can speak for myself, we should go through a process because there shouldn't even be a little doubt. There shouldn't be a doubt.
Jill Wine-Banks, no one on the Republican side agreed with that. None of them applied the standard of no doubt. They went with reasonable doubt and gave the benefit of the reasonable doubt to Brett Kavanaugh.
Actually, I don't think they even used a standard of reasonable doubt. That's what you would use in a criminal trial. This was a job interview. This was for a promotion from the circuit court to the highest court in our land, a lifetime appointment. And the standard is not that of a criminal case. The standard is, was he at all believable? Did he display judicial temperament? And as Lisa just said, his performance in front of the Senate last Thursday showed that he is temperamentally unsuited for any court. He attacked the judges. He attacked the senators who were questioning him. He acted in a way that was completely not appropriate for any candidate for the Supreme Court or for any candidate. Who would hire anybody who behaved that way if it was a corporate position? No one would. It was not the right standard. And Susan Collins today said it wasn't a beyond a reasonable doubt standard. She used a much lower standard and then gave him a pass on it. But no one would have believed them. People believe that men who come forward saying they were attacked in a sexual manner by a priest, they come forward 30 years later and no one questions whether they're telling the truth. So why is it when a woman comes forward and has a very credible case to make and says things, they won't even investigate? Anita Hill had more of a sympathetic hearing in the sense that at least the FBI did more of an investigation, not adequate, and the Senate didn't allow corroborating witnesses who were there to testify. Here, they didn't even look for them. Of course, you can't find evidence if you are told not to interview the people who have the evidence. That was wrong.
And the Senate brought in 22 witnesses to testify about Anita Hill's accusations. And of course, we saw they didn't bring in any witnesses beyond Dr. Ford. And this brings us to James Roach's tweet tonight. James Roach is a former Yale roommate of Brett Kavanaugh. And he tweeted tonight, he's been tweeting about this kind of thing regularly. And he said, "I just heard about another classmate at Yale who reached out to the local FBI field office to describe Kavanaugh drinking a nasty drunk, definitely blackout, and gambling. No reply." And Maya, that's one of what now is several people from Yale who had information they wanted to bring to the FBI.
Yeah, and I think Lisa and Jill are absolutely right. And I would say it's even worse than we're talking about it right now, because they didn't even apply a presumption of innocence to Kavanaugh. They applied a presumption that they were going to approve him no matter what. And that point, Lawrence, is the most important, is that they intentionally ignored evidence that someone who is being considered for the highest court of the land may have actually lied to them under oath. They refused to look at it. When they said they would reopen the FBI background check, they tied the hands. They literally, not they, the White House, let's be clear, they handcuffed the FBI. They handcuffed the FBI. So we're talking about a democratic process that lacked all democracy, but it didn't even apply any standard, because its standard would have said that we will actually, even if we were presuming innocence, we will look at the evidence to ensure that that presumption actually applies. They did not do it.
And Lisa, Senator Murkowski seemed to accept Justice John Paul Stevens' standard of evaluating this, and who would be better at evaluating that. No one knows more about the Supreme Court than he does. But Susan Collins did. It's like she didn't hear a word that Justice Stevens said.
That's right. And I think she, in essence, didn't want to hear a word from him and from others. For her to basically credit, as you pointed out, credit Brett Kavanaugh as truthful because he testified under oath, ignores the mountain of evidence that he repeatedly testified falsely under oath in 2004, 2006, the beginning of September of 2018, and at the end of September. And so he was not entitled to any such presumption. In fact, under the rules of evidence, if they were applicable, he would be entitled to presumption that everything he says is presumed to be false and falsely exonerating.
Maya Wiley, Lisa Graves, Jill Wine-Banks, thank you for starting our discussion tonight. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.